Hello everyone, welcome back to another Genshin Impact video. My name's Arkrefner and I like to play games, and today we're going to be talking about all of the best possible 4-star options for Hu Tao. A lot of people asked for this video in particular, and it's going to be a long one guys because we're reviewing 7 different weapons. For each weapon we're going to be going over their individual stats, buffs, and then we're going to go over the Cryo Regisfine and see how it performs there. And then finally, we will be going over its performance in the Spiral Abyss, floor 9. The Favonius and Dragonbane are both R5, while all of the other weapons will be R1, and all of the weapons have been leveled up to level 70. I will mainly be using Xingqiu and Xiangling as supports. Xiangling will only be used to break the Cryo Regisfine's shield, and Xingqiu will be used to apply wet. I also purposefully made sure that I do not have any resonances just to make sure that we're getting just Hu Tao's raw damage and not relying too much on support. As you'll see, I also heavily nerfed Xingqiu. I made sure that I took away all of his attacking power and just put it into HP for sustain and support. This way we will mainly be seeing Hu Tao's large numbers and not focusing on Xingqiu's insane DPS support. Alright, let's go ahead and look at Hu Tao's stats without any of the weapons equipped. I equipped a level 1 weapon so that we can just see what her base stats are without any additional effects from any of the 4-star weapons. You can see that her attack is at 502, her defense is at 1099, her elemental mastery is at 42, and her HP is at 29,858. You'll also see that her crit rate is at 44.7%. This is a little bit low but not too bad. Her crit damage is at 198.8%, which is actually very good. Her energy recharge is pretty low at 105.8, and her pyro bonus damage is at 61.6%. I'm currently running Hu Tao on a 4-piece Crimson Witch set. Hu Tao can work well with other sets, but I think that this is probably her most well-rounded set, and is definitely the set that you want to be running if you are mainly going for elemental reactions. Although I do have some constellations that I pulled off screen, Hu Tao will be at C0 for this entire video, and all of her talents will be at level 8 for the entire video. Guys, I'm gonna be real with you, I can't tell you how long this took to make, because not only did I have to format and edit this entire video together, but I also had to spend a few weeks getting enough materials to get all these weapons up to snuff. So if you do end up finding this video helpful, please feel free to share it with anyone that has Hu Tao, and also feel free to leave me a like and comment down below. It really helps me grow my channel and I'd greatly appreciate it. Also feel free to stick around by hitting that subscribe button so that you can catch up on any Genshin Impact videos that I decide to make in the future. If this video happens to get over 100 likes, I will make something very similar for Rosario when she comes out, so let me know what you guys think. Alright, and with that, let's start the damage showcase. I hope that you guys enjoy the video. Alright, and starting things off, we have the prototype Starglitter. This is a weapon that anyone can get so long as you still have a prototype. And honestly, it's pretty good. Whenever you use an elemental skill, you do increase your normal and charged attack by 8%. Unfortunately, you can't get both stacks because her cooldown between skills is pretty long. One thing I will say about this weapon is that it does have a very low base attack, and so it will have one of the lowest overall attacks compared to other weapons in this video. However, at the end of the day, I would still pick this weapon over any of the physical bonus damage weapons because Hu Tao just does not scale well with physical damage. Plus, the energy recharge on this weapon is actually very nice because it gives Hu Tao a lot more sustain because she's able to spam her burst more often and heal herself. Also, I know that 8% on normal and charged attacks may not seem like it's a whole lot, but it actually did end up pushing up this weapon in terms of damage compared to some of the other weapons that had higher base attacks. Alright, let's go ahead and try it out on the Cryo Regisfine. So just like every time that I'm going to fight the Cryo Regisfine, I basically use Xiangling in order to break its defense, then I switch in Hu Tao just to see her damage, and then eventually switch in Xingqiu so that I can see what her Vaporize damage is and see what her crit damage is when taking down the Cryo Regisfine. Alright, now let's apply Wet and go for the burst. And 74,000, not too bad. Honestly, for a free-to-play weapon, that is pretty good damage. However, the reason why this is still B rank and underneath all of the other weapons on this tier list is because it's not as much damage. But before we completely write off the prototype Starglitter, let's try it out in the Abyss. So each one of my Abyss runs on floor 9 is going to just be Hu Tao and Xingqiu, and every single time I do it, I pick one of the defensive boosts, which basically just gives me elemental res. This way we're not buffing Hu Tao's attack and we're just going to see it as it is. Each time I do a run in the Abyss, I also try to start only with Hu Tao's damage making sure that we're seeing what her damage is without any vaporize or melt effects. And then I switch in Xingqiu later on to make sure that we can see what her vaporize damage is. Honestly, while playing with the prototype Starglitter, I thought it was actually pretty smooth. I didn't experience too much problems. However, I think that this is largely because I did have very good stats on my artifacts. I think that this weapon would fall off a lot if I didn't have the good damage multipliers on my artifacts to back it up. However, if this is all that you have, you can still do decent damage with it, and it's going to help support your Hu Tao pretty well. Also, one of the trade-offs is even though you may not be doing as much damage as some of the other weapons in this tier list, you will be able to keep Hu Tao alive a lot easier because you're going to be able to spam your burst more often. It really just depends on what you value most and what you think is going to help you play her to the best of your ability. I think that is pretty easy to get hung up on the fact that there are stronger weapons in the game, and so you feel like you need to have stronger weapons in order to play certain characters. However, this just isn't true. You can still complete the majority of the content in the game using all free-to-play weapons. It just feels a lot better when you're using something that hits a lot harder. However, if you do get lucky in the gacha, or you're willing to spend a few Masterless Starglitter, then some of the other weapons are probably going to be better fits for you. Alright, and next up, starting off the A tier, we have the Favonius Lance at R5. I do think that this is a straight upgrade from the prototype Starglitter because it is an energy recharge weapon, but you do get your burst up much faster because whenever you crit, you get additional energy particles. The energy recharge is lower than the prototype Starglitter, but those energy particles are just so much more valuable and you get them pretty regularly. Also, the Favonius Lance surprisingly has one of the highest base attacks of all the 4-star lances, and so you will actually still be doing some decent damage. Also, if you are periodically summoning on character banners, this is actually a weapon that can appear at any time, and so getting multiple refinements on it is something that is just going to happen naturally over a period of time. Alright, now let's go ahead and try it against the Cryo Regisfine. Let's break its shield with Xiangling, and then switch to Hu Tao to start dealing some damage. As you can see, the damage with just Hu Tao isn't actually that bad, it's pretty strong, and we get it down to halfway without using any elemental reactions. And then when we apply Wet with Xingqiu, we are actually able to crit for 75,000 damage, which is nothing to sneeze at. Alright, let's go ahead and try out Spiral Abyss, floor 9 with Hu Tao using the Favonius Lance. Honestly, I think that this lance is completely looked over. I think that it is surprisingly good. I didn't think that this would be that good on Hu Tao since it is more of a support type weapon. However, if you are trying to use Hu Tao as a sub DPS and not your main DPS, this is actually a pretty solid weapon for her. Although it will not do as much damage as some of the other weapons coming later on in the video, it does have the most sustain because you are constantly able to keep up your burst. This is not only great for making sure that you're able to heal Hu Tao pretty regularly, but if you have another pyro character on the team like Klee or Diluc who's going to be your main damage dealer, then you can constantly keep them topped off as well. However, that being said, if you are planning on Hu Tao being your main pyro damage dealer, then I just can't recommend this weapon because I feel as though there are so many other ways to get energy on Hu Tao and she doesn't really need it in order to be a strong character. So essentially, if you want to have a constant stream of bursts, then this is a great weapon for you as well as being able to support your whole team. However, if you're looking for raw damage numbers, then it's probably best to hold off and just look at some of the other weapons in this video. Again, this is definitely not a bad weapon, and if you do have multiple refinements on it, I would definitely consider it, but since Hu Tao really wants to be the star of the show and dealing out a lot of damage, it just feels like a waste to not give her the highest damage possible and then instead give this weapon to a support type character.
Let me weave you a verse.
Alright, and moving along we have the Royal Spear. This spear is interesting to say the least. I think that it is a good spear. It does give you a lot of attack, and so you do end up hitting pretty hard. However, I do think that the biggest drawback of this weapon is that although it does increase your crit rate, it only does it temporarily and is completely dependent on whether or not you fail a crit hit. So the simplest way to explain this is if you end up hitting an enemy and you do not crit, then you will increase your crit rate by a set amount. However, as soon as you do crit, then your crit rate is reset to whatever your crit rate was before the effects took place. So if your crit rate is naturally very low, then you're going to constantly be dropping back down to that low rate and then using the Royal Spear to build back up to a good crit rate. This will overall improve your overall amount of crits that you land. However, I think that it is pretty finicky and it is completely dependent on getting multiple refinements in order to keep your crit rate more consistent. So that being said, I don't think that refinement rank 1 is really worth it, but as you do get more refinements, then it does become an incredibly useful weapon. And since crit rate is one of the hardest things to come by in Genshin Impact, this can be extremely valuable for players that are struggling to make sure that they are critting regularly. Okay, now that we've explained that, let's try it out on our favorite friend, the Cryoregisvine. Let's break its shield with Xiangling, and then start going ham with Hu Tao. As you can probably see, Hu Tao's attack is just much higher since it's closer to 2800 when her skill is up. So in terms of raw attack, this is dealing a lot more damage and putting the other two weapons that we covered to shame. The burst even ends up doing a whopping close to 80,000 damage, which the prototype and the Favonius just can't get close to. Alright, but now let's go ahead and try it out in Spiral Abyss, just to see how it does there. Honestly, I think that this weapon is pretty strong. It's a lot better than most people say. I noticed that I was critting more often, which is kind of the whole point of having it, and if you do have multiple refinements, like I said, you will be critting pretty regularly. Hu Tao naturally scales with crit damage and crit rate, so this is actually extremely valuable. So if you naturally have a lot of crit damage from your artifacts and just from Hu Tao's base kit, then it might be good to use this weapon because you'll be able to crit way more consistently. I do not like that your crit rate does fluctuate so much while using this weapon, but considering that there aren't very many crit rate options instead of the Battle Pass weapon or the Lithic Spear, which is limited, then all of a sudden the Royal Spear looks a lot more appealing. Honestly, when it comes down to it, I think that you just need to look at what you have available to you and see if this will be a good fit for your Hu Tao in particular. I think that most people will end up saying that the Royal Spear just isn't worth it, but I think it really does depend on what you have available, what your artifacts are, and what your overall stats end up being when you finally deck out your Hu Tao. Because at the end of the day, bigger numbers are always nice, but if you're not actually landing those big numbers, it's essentially useless. However, we do have a couple more weapons on this list, so make sure to look at them before deciding.
Rain outlines your fate. Time to go. Witness the power of Gugwa.
Alright, and we finally made it to the S tier weapons. We're starting out with the Deathmatch, which is the Battle Pass weapon. And this may shock you that it is at the lowest part of the S tier, but I found out quickly that this weapon is extremely consistent in terms of dealing damage, but it actually won't give you the highest damage numbers because instead of being a high damage dealing weapon, it really is one of the most well-balanced weapons in the game. Essentially, at Refinement Rank 1, whenever you're fighting a single enemy such as a boss, you get a 24% boost to your overall attack. But when you're fighting multiple enemies, your attack is boosted by 16 and your defense is boosted by 16. So instead of this being a all-out, all-damage weapon, it actually adjusts to whatever you're fighting. I personally really like this because this means that when you're fighting multiple enemies and you're more likely to get hit, then you actually have a little bit of padding and will keep Hu Tao alive much easier. And when you're fighting a single enemy, then you're actually able to do more damage than you would against hordes of enemies. But honestly, the most valuable thing about this weapon is the fact that it has a substat of crit rate. And since crit rate is incredibly hard to come by, like I mentioned earlier, this actually makes it extremely valuable because you will be able to do much more consistent damage. However, despite having really nice buffs, it does have a downside, being that its base attack is actually one of the lowest of all the 4-star weapons. This is the main reason why I did not put it higher up on the list, because Hu Tao actually craves having a higher base attack so that when you improve her HP, then she has a higher threshold for her overall damage. And as you see, her damage actually capped out with Vaporize at 75,000 damage, as opposed to some of the other weapons that can crit for well over 80. But she was also able to take the Cryo Registine down a lot faster because of more consistent crits. So you really just have to end up weighing your options and seeing what's going to be best for you. It's funny, even though the Royal Spear did have higher damage numbers overall, I felt as though the Deathmatch was just a lot more consistent because it is a flat boost to your crit rate and it doesn't go away. And with the Deathmatch, even though it was only at level 70 and will still increase my crit rate as it is leveled up, having over a 70% crit rate just means that you're not worried about whether you're going to crit or not, because 3 out of 4 times you are going to crit. Overall, I think that this weapon is extremely well thought out, and I think that MiHoYo did a very good job balancing out a weapon that's going to be good in just about any circumstance that you throw it into. The only thing that I don't like is that its base attack is so low that it just doesn't feel as nice when you do have other weapons that I will get to in just a second that just hit for much more damage. There's also the fact that this is not a free-to-play weapon and you do have to pay for the Battle Pass in order to get it. I personally think that the Battle Pass is worth it because you get so much for a pretty fair price, but I know that some people can't afford it, and therefore you can always just pick any of the other weapons on this list that are going to better suit you. But for those that do already get the Battle Pass or already have this weapon, it is a very, very solid choice for Hu Tao and is probably her most well-balanced option. However, if you are looking for more of a damage increase, there are 3 more weapons that will get you larger damage overall, so let's get into them. Alright, now let's go ahead and talk about the Lithic Spear. So this is a spear that I actually was on the fence about where to place it because it's kind of all over the place, but I can't deny how powerful it is because it does give you additional attack and crit rate. But it is completely dependent on how many Liyue characters that you have in your party, so it does greatly affect who you can and cannot bring along with Hu Tao in order to deal more damage. However, increasing both your attack and your crit rate is extremely valuable, and ends up making this weapon do a lot of damage even at Refinement Rank 1. It completely out damages the Battle Pass weapon, which honestly did shock me. However, there is a big caveat with the fact that you can spend a specific amount of money and get the Battle Pass weapon, but you will have to roll in the gacha in order to get the Lithic Spear, and on top of that, the Lithic Spear is limited. It's only on this banner, the Staff of Homa banner, and then it'll be gone. So if you do get lucky and get it, then it is a great spear to put on just about any character that comes from Liyue. However, the big caveat is that if you are not using members from Liyue in your party, then this weapon essentially becomes completely useless. Luckily, there are a good cast of Liyue characters that can help support Hu Tao, but if you did plan on using characters like Sucrose or Bennett or any of the other healers like Diona, then all of a sudden you're losing out on valuable DPS that you could be getting from this weapon. It also really sucks in this regard because the only healer from Liyue currently is Qiqi, and since she's a 5-star character, you might not have her. So I have very mixed feelings about this weapon, but like I said, I cannot deny just how powerful it is because even without refinements, it is still dealing a lot of damage. And if you are pulling a lot on that weapon banner and you manage to get multiple refinements, then all of a sudden this weapon is going to be competing with some refinement rank 1 5-star weapons. At the end of the day, you're just going to have to decide what is worth it and not worth it to you, and whether sacrificing your overall team comps is going to be worth the attack boost. For this round in Spiral Abyss, I will be using 4 characters just to make sure that I am getting the full benefits of the Lithic Spear. However, I'm still only going to use Xingqiu to make sure that we're just focusing on Hu Tao's damage and not the other support characters. I'm not gonna lie, the Lithic Spear is extremely powerful and I did enjoy using it. It felt very effortless in terms of dealing damage, and I was dealing much higher damage than I was with the Battle Pass weapon, and my crits were a little less finicky than with the Royal Spear. Overall, I really like this weapon. I just wish that I could use whatever characters that I wanted with it, but that is the entire gimmick of this weapon. I just think that this weapon is going to lose a lot of value with time, because as we start to get into other regions and we start getting other characters, then all of a sudden you're not going to want to only use Liyue characters. But for right now, where we are in the game currently, this is extremely valuable because half the cast is Liyue, half the cast is Mondstadt, so it's not like we currently have a lot of other options. I'm just scared about down the line where you're going to start to want to use other characters from different regions, and you're going to feel locked into the characters that you currently have from Liyue because those are the best characters because you chose this specific spear. However, if you do like the Liyue characters and you do like Hu Tao and you're going to double down and make them your main team, then this is probably one of the absolute best weapons for you. Again, this all comes down to what you personally prefer and what you need for your particular characters. However, I do still think that there are two better weapons in my personal opinion, and we'll be getting to those in just a second. Alright, and now we're down to the final two. Let's start off with the Blackcliff Polearm. So this weapon is extremely powerful. It gives you an amazing amount of crit damage and is probably going to be the most similar free-to-play weapon to the Staff of Homa. Although it does not have a very high base attack, overall it is still going to be a very valuable weapon because the crit damage just boosts your damage astronomically. The only caveat to this weapon is that you do have to defeat an enemy to get the secondary buffs. Essentially, for every enemy that you defeat up to 3 enemies, you do get a raw attack boost. And this raw attack boost does last for 30 seconds, which is really nice. However, if you are fighting single enemies, then all of a sudden you aren't going to get any attack boost and you're only going to be benefiting from the crit damage. However, like I said, this crit damage amount is so much that it might be worth it for you in the end if you're trying to get big numbers. I also think that this weapon is extremely valuable in places such as Spiral Abyss because you will be fighting hordes of enemies and essentially you'll always be able to keep your buff up. It really just comes down to if you're going to be able to get enough crit rate in order to make this valuable. Crit damage is very, very nice, but if you are not supplementing it with enough crit rate, then all of a sudden it becomes useless because you will never see those big numbers on the screen. So, even though I was using a crit damage helm here, I probably should have been using a crit rate helm in order to make sure that I was critting more often. But ultimately, it's just going to come down to your taste and what percentages that you like. But it's always good to go for a golden ratio of 2-to-1. I mainly put this weapon up so high because I just think that it is extremely valuable for what you have to spend in order to get it. Essentially, you have to spend 25 Masterless Starglitter in order to get it from Paimon's Bargain Shop, and I think that this is actually a pretty good steal because as opposed to paying for the Battle Pass weapon or having to spend a lot trying to roll in the gacha, you can just guarantee that you get one weapon that is very good, and it is good with refinements, but it's actually very strong with 0 refinements. And unlike the Lithic Spear, it's not limited. You can get it every other month from Paimon's Bargain Shop. I just think that this weapon is really good because it is so accessible to anyone so long as you're making wishes occasionally. Yes, you will have to sacrifice 5 wishes, but I think that that's worth it in order to have a good and powerful weapon without having to spend extra money on it. The main thing is just going to be focusing on making sure that you have a good crit to crit damage ratio, and I think that's doable with enough time, energy, and resources. And since Hu Tao is made to be a burst damage dealer, it just makes a lot of sense for her to come out onto the field, deal as much damage as possible, and then be put back into the party while you deal damage with your supports until she's ready to come back onto the field. And it feels like the Blackcliff Polearm is really designed well to fit this playstyle. Again, I do think that it is going to come down to what you personally have and what resources are available to you. If you do not have a crit rate Helm, then maybe this isn't the best weapon for you, but if you're trying to get the biggest damage numbers possible, then this is a pretty solid weapon. In fact, I think out of all the Refinement rank 1 weapons, this is the strongest weapon in terms of overall damage output if you have high enough crit rate. However, there is still one more option that I think is definitely overlooked, and I think is actually very, very valuable if you have it. So let's go over that after we finish up this Spiral Abyss run. Alright, and last but not least, we have an R5 Dragonsbane. Now I know a lot of people are already going to be upset that I am having an R5 weapon on here, but I do think that out of all of the weapons that I've previously mentioned besides the Favonius, this is actually one of the easiest to get weapons in the game in terms of 4-star gacha weapons. If you have been summoning regularly since the start of this game, I'm pretty sure you have at least 1 to 2 copies of this weapon already. And although it isn't very impressive at lower refinement levels, when you do finally get it to refinement rank 5, it is going to be hitting like a truck. Essentially, this weapon is tailor-made for characters like Xiangling and Hu Tao when they are specifically using the Crimson Witch set. Because not only are you getting an elemental mastery boost, but you're also constantly doing more damage to enemies that are inflicted with Pyro or Hydro. And since most of us are going to have Xingqiu after pulling for Hu Tao, then you're going to have a very, very strong team in order to take down just about any enemy that can be affected by Pyro and Hydro. Hu Tao is really one of those characters that really seems like they want to be utilizing reactions from elements as much as possible, and this one really, really suits her. By far, out of all of the weapons that I used in this showcase, this was the one that I noticed the biggest spike in DPS whenever I was applying Hydro. And since Vaporize is one of the best elemental reactions in the game, it seems like a shame to not utilize this regularly. I think it's also important to say that if you already have this weapon, it might be best just to use this instead of going out of your way to find another weapon when you know that this one can deal a lot of damage if you utilize it properly. I think this weapon more so than any other weapon is going to require a lot of patience in order to get it up to its full potential, but I do think that it's worth it. And although it will rely on you having another character like Xingqiu, Mona, Barbara, Child in order to make sure that you are applying Hydro, I think that it's worth it for the overall damage buffs that you'll be getting, and I think that playing with an elemental reaction style of gameplay as opposed to just hitting enemies with Pyro just from Hu Tao, you're going to get a lot more damage overall, and you're going to be able to clear content a lot easier. I think that it's very easy to forget that this is a team-based game that is completely revolved around elemental reactions and reactions between different characters and their abilities. And honestly, I'm extremely guilty of this myself. DPS characters are great, but DPS characters with supports and making sure that you're utilizing everything that you can is far more valuable. I also personally think that getting these naturally over the course of time is going to be better for your account, as opposed to spending your masterless Starglitter in order to get things like the Blackcliff Polearm or the Royal Spear, because you could have used those wishes in order to get a new character, which are infinitely more valuable than getting a high tier weapon. At the end of the day, I do think that all of these weapons are extremely viable, and you can use them however you need to use them in order to further Hu Tao's kit and amplify her damage. It's really going to come down to what you have personally available to you, either through artifacts, through your weapon choices, what teammates that you have for her, etc. At the end of the day, we are all playing on different accounts, and we're all going to have different things available to us. So learning to pick and choose what's going to be best for you is going to be really important, especially if you're a free-to-play player. But I hope that learning a little bit more about each one of them and seeing them actually in video format will help you make a better decision for you. I don't think that there's necessarily anything wrong with going purely based off of math, but actually seeing how it applies and how it feels in-game can really inform your decision on what's going to be best for you and how you play. Alright guys, I talked your ears off for about half an hour. I honestly think that this might be the longest video that I've ever made, but if it was helpful to you guys, then I think that it was worth it. If you enjoyed the video, please leave me a like and comment down below. It really helps my channel grow, like I mentioned earlier. And if you want to see more, make sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any of my videos. My upload schedule is a little bit erratic since this is not my full-time job, so make sure to press that notification button if you don't want to miss anything. I hope that you guys have a great day and that you're still enjoying playing Genshin Impact and exploring Teyvat. Alright, till next time, best wishes, bye.